Well, hello Internet, and welcome to part 22 of my Learn to Program series. In this part of the tutorial, I'm going to basically make a calculator from scratch. The reason why I did this is you guys have been asking me to make a real app in one video and show the entire process, and you also asked for a live coding video. So pretty much this is a live coding video. Nothing's been done ahead of time. I just edited out everything so you don't have to sit through a 2-hour video. Instead, you can just watch whatever this video ends up being in length, and of course in the description is a link to all of the code and a transcript of the video, and you should get that. And of course it's all free, and the only thing I did ahead of time was I drew what I want the calculator to look like. So you're going to see the entire process in this one video, and I have a lot to do, so let's get into it. Okay, so you can see right here, this is the calculator that we want to design, and it's going to work like a calculator. There's no point in me going into that. So this is what we're going to shoot for, and if at all possible, I'm going to put this PDF on my website, and you can get it and put it in front of you so that you can also look at that, because all of this stuff is very important so that you understand what's going on. Alright, so when I start an application, what I do is I create what is called a use case description. And what this is it's going to describe everything the app does step by step. And I always do this no matter what the application is. Sometimes I make a sequence diagram for more complicated applications, but this isn't that complicated, so I'm not going to do that now. However, in later videos, I most definitely will. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to list out exactly what's going to happen whenever the user is using our application. So the user is going to click a number button. Alright, so that's the first thing that's going to happen. Then after they do that, the user clicks a math button, and then the user clicks another number button. And this is very important to understand this process with a simple application, because as we get into more complicated applications, they will make more sense if you start out simple. And then the user clicks an equal button, and the result shows. Alright, so this is the entire process of our application. Well, this doesn't tell the whole story, but it's very important to get here first. Now what we need to do is think about potential problems we could have. So I'm going to go through here, I'm going to say note, and we'll think about a problem. Well, since every button is going to require the previous button to have been clicked, we want to make sure that the click occurred. So that's some type of logic we need to put in our application. So we'll just say something like make sure previous required button was clicked. Okay, so we know that that's something we want to do. So based off of what we know the user is going to do up here, what are we going to put this information in? Well, we don't need to worry about it for the number button. However, we are going to have to worry about it for the math button. So I'm just going to put note 1, and I'm going to say make sure the entry has a value. Alright, so that's one place that we want to make sure that we cover that. And is it going to make yes, we're going to also need that to be done here. So we're going to say note 1 once again. And everybody does these use case descriptions completely different. This isn't some ironclad way, and very often I do them completely different, just depending upon the project. So this is just a guide, nothing else. So we're going to say here, make sure a math function was clicked before we will get to the equals. So we don't need to worry about doing this with number. We want it because the numbers are going to be picked. You know, here we don't need anything to be clicked, and here we technically do. So it's better to try to have this logic be in these two boxes and not in the number button. Okay? Makes sense. Hopefully it makes sense. Alright, so I think that we have that covered. Now let's think of something else that we might have an issue with. So note 2. What else might happen? Well, maybe we want to make a way to track which math button was clicked last. Okay, so we'll say, just type that out, a way to track which math button. And you could pause the video and actually create your own notes where you think you would potentially have problems. That would be great to do that as a test here. So which math button was clicked last? That's something that we're definitely going to need to do, because we need to know if we're going to be adding or subtracting, multiplying or dividing whenever we get down to the equals part. So where are we going to handle this logic? Well, I personally think we should handle the logic here once again with our math button. So I'm going to say, how can I track that? I can track it in numerous different ways, and I'm writing this code out of my head, so this might not work. But, I'm just going to go through the process. Obviously, skip to the end of the video if you want to see the final application to see if it worked. So, I'm putting myself on the line here. So I'm going to say that I want to switch Boolean values representing math buttons to false on entry. Alright, so entry of the, this is going to be a function. There's going to be a function specifically for handling number clicks. This is going to be for math button clicks, obviously number, and equals. Okay, so we know we're going to have at least 3 functions we are going to create. And you might want to come up here and say something like that. At least 3 functions needed. Alright, that might be something that you want to put as another note. Alright, so is there anything else we need to handle in regards to which math button was clicked and so forth and so on? Well, I know that I have a GUI interface and I'm going to be passing information based off of button clicks. So I'm going to say here that I want to have button pass in the math function pressed. So every time they click on a button, it is going to pass the math button that was clicked on into this function. And you could go up here and do something like an attribute for this. You could say something like self is going to be passed inside of here, and then math function. Alright, so that could be something else you could do. Whatever makes it work best for you. Alright, so we're doing make a way to track which math button was clicked last. Well, what should we do with these other guys? The math function clicked on is not going to impact number in any way, but it definitely will with equals, because when equals is clicked on, I am going to have that guy go and perform the result, because, see, result shows. So I'm going to say down inside of here that I want to check which math function was clicked, obviously, because so that I know what type of operation to perform, and I want to provide the correct solution. Is there anything else we need to think about? Well, note 3, is there going to be something? Well, whenever they click on the number buttons, well, they might just click on one of them, but they could also click on multiple number buttons. So I have to be able to handle that inside of the entry box. So that could cause potential problems. So something to think about. I'm just going to say think about a way to handle the user entering both single numbers and multiple numbers. So with this guy up here, with the math buttons, they're only going to click on it once, and that value is going to get passed inside of the math function. It's going to be handled. Up here, they could click on it multiple different times. So we need to think about how we're going to handle that right there. And I'm going to put this whole entire thing on my website, so in the description you can click on that, get it in front of you if you want to look at it. So how are we going to handle this? I'm going to say with each number button press, add the new value to the end of the first, and then update the entry. Okay, so each time they hit an additional button, that additional number is going to be passed into the number function, and it is going to update the entry. All right, so we could say something. Now we know that this guy right here is going to be getting self, and it's also going to be getting past the number that was clicked on it. All right, so anything else we need to do? Well, note 3, think about a way to handle user entering both. Okay, so I'm thinking that note 3 has absolutely nothing to do with equals and plus, and so we're not going to worry about that. Is there anything else we need to think about? Let me just think here. This is why editing out pauses is a good thing. Well, I think that I also want to track the first number in the entry box after the math button is clicked. So if they hit a 2, and then they click on plus, and then they click on 3, well, I'm going to need to know that they clicked on 2 first. So I want to track that. So track the first number in the entry box after a math, and when I say track, I mean store it, after a math button is clicked. Alright, so that's something else I want to do. So where are we going to handle that guy? Well, I think the best place to handle that is in the math function. So the math function is going to be the sole place where we are going to say store the value that was entered into the entry box previous. So with this, I'm going to say store the entry value on entry to this function. So whenever we get into the math button part, it is going to store that value. So what does that tell me? Well, that tells me that this is going to be a class field. I'm going to have the whole calculator is going to be an object. So everything we create here is going to be a big class file. And I want to store the values for entry previous to them changing inside of a class field. So I know we need that. Is there anything else I'm going to need? Well, whenever the math button's clicked on, it also makes sense to clear it so that they'll be able to enter in their new number. So I want to clear the entry field after they click on the math button. And I'm going to do that inside of the math function that we have here. Is there any place else that we need to worry about tracking that number? No, because the math function is going to do it and we don't need to worry about it. Is there anything else? There may be, there may not be. I may forget things. We'll find out. But whenever you do this in the beginning, this dramatically cuts down on your debugging issues later on. So I'm going to say, what else could be a problem? Well, there could be division problems caused through integer division. That's something. One way, because if we're going to be dividing between integers, that's going to cut off floats and So we'll say something like, what about division problems caused by an integer division? How are we going to handle that? That's a big question mark. So what could we do? Well, one solution is just to come in here and always, whenever we're working with a number, convert to a float each time we retrieve or store values in the entry. All right, so that's going to solve that. And is there anything else? Is there anything else that I can think of that we could possibly have? Right now, this is everything. Right now, to me, this is every single thing we need to know. So this is my use case description. This is my starting off point. And this is going to dramatically cut down on errors. So I have this, and what you should do is get it, put it in front of you, and refer to it as I'm writing the code, because I'm going to print this out and put it in front of myself as I write the code. So now I'm going to jump over and start writing some code. Okay, so this is the calculator we want to make, and the very first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create my interface for my calculator. So let's just get rid of that. Alright, so what are we going to do? Well, we're going to come in here and we want to import some things. So we'll say import and import, enter. I want to style these so that we can review what we did in the previous parts of the tutorial. And then we're going to create our calculator class. So cal. Alright, so as we refer to our use case description, we know that we want to store the current value to display in our entry. So I'm going to call this calculator value, and I'm going to give it, remember we're using all floats, also referring to our use case description, so that's what that guy's going to be. We also, as we refer to our use case description, we wanted to have a way to track the last math button that was clicked. Now, there may be better ways of doing this, but whenever I'm programming, when I'm first creating something, I want to create a system that works first. That is my ultimate goal. Then I want to streamline and refactor, which means the same exact thing as streamline, and make my code a little bit neater. But now I just want this to work. So I'm going to say something like, I want to have a way of tracking all of the different math functions that were clicked on. So we'll say add and also subtract, obviously. And is there anything else? I don't remember anything else being there. So I can't see it in my use case anyways right now. So remember, I want to create the interface for this. So let's create the interface for this. And where we're going to create our interface is in the initialization function for our class. And this guy is going to get self passed into it, and it's also going to get passed root, because it needs root to the root object to be able to work with our interface. So what are we going to do here? Well, I want to, self is a way of referring to our object, and I want to hold the changing value that is going to be stored in the entry window inside of a tkinter string variable. So I'm going to call this entry value. And some things I use here might be used in the application, and some things may be thrown out. This is just me writing code based off my use case description. I'm going to create this guy and root, and value is going to be equal to nothing right now. So it's a string value. That's why we have double quotes inside of there. I'd also like to class this up a little bit and define a title for my application. And to do that, I'm just going to say root title and calculator. All right, so we have that. I would also like to have my calculator not be changeable. I don't see any reason why the user should be able to change the width or the height of this guy. So I want to define the width and height of my window, but I have absolutely no idea how big it's going to be, so I'm just going to create something and then change it afterwards. So I'm going to say root geometry, and we'll say something like 400 width by 400 height. I know that's wrong, but we're just going to do it and see how it turns out. And like I said, I want to block resizing of this guy, so I'm going to go resizable, and I'm going to set the width resizing to false and the height resizing to false. Okay, so we'll just work through creating what we already drew. I'd also like to customize the styling for the buttons because that picture that I drew doesn't look at all like the standard way of styling. So I'm going to go style is equal to TTK. This is all from previous parts of the tutorial, so if you haven't watched them, this might not make sense. This is how you create a custom style either way. So we'll say style configure, and then to refer to a TTK styling for our different widgets, we go T button, and I'm just going to come in here and say something like font, and I'll say serif, and let's have it be 15 and see how that turns out. And also I want to throw some padding inside of this equal to 10. Once again, that might be totally terrible, but we're going to see how it works out. Also come in here and let's do styling for our entry because we want to do that also. Let's have the font be roughly the same. Maybe let's make it a little bit bigger. So let's take it up to 18, see how that works, and leave the padding be exactly the same. And now it's time to actually create the different parts of our different widgets here. So the very first thing I want to do is create a text entry box that's going to be displayed at the top of the screen. So I'm going to call this number entry, and I'll go TTK so that it can get the styling for this guy. And I'm going to go roots. And what else do I want to do for this? Well, one thing I want to do is I want to tie it to this guy that I have up here, this entry value, so that whenever the entry changes here, it's going to automatically change there. To do that, we just come in and we say text variable, and look at that, I was smart and didn't use camel case, and we're going to tie it to entry value. And I want this to be a certain width. I'm just going to use my default that I always use, 50, and see how that turns out. Now you're going to have to handle the gridding of this with the grid geometry manager outside of here. If you don't do that, if you put .grid at the end of this and that's going to cause problems because that's going to return none. So we want to be able to change this value and get the value inside of there, so we have to do this stuff, the gridding of it, separately. So we'll come in and throw this here, and we will then say grid, and this is going to be row 0, obviously it's the top, and we want to say that it is going to span over 4 columns. Alright, because we have 4 buttons, so that should work out perfectly fine underneath there. And that's all we need to do. Now we need to worry about the number buttons. Again, refer to your calculator as I am doing here. The calculator drawing is what I mean. So I'm going to say self button 7 is going to be equal to TTK button, and I do that so that I can get the styling that I defined here. TTK button, what are you doing? Put a period in there. There we are. And then to create it, we go root, and the text inside of it is going to be 7, just like we have in our little drawing. And then I want to be able to call a function. I got to think about what's a good function name for this guy. Let's put this on a separate line. I think a good name for it would be something like button press, maybe number button press, but that's kind of long. So I'm just going to call it button press for now. So we'll say self, and button press is going to be the function that is going to be called. And what did I do? I forgot to put a command inside of here. And equal to, and I'm going to do this as a lambda. And self button press And whenever the button is clicked on, it is going to pass in the number 7 so that we know which one of the buttons was clicked on. And in this situation, there's nothing to change with the button. Let's come in here and change that. There's nothing to change with the button, so I can just put grid on here and not worry about anything else. So I'm going to say grid, and row is equal to 1, and I want this to be inside of column 0. Alright, so there is all that stuff. Let's see if we can move this back. And obviously single quotes and double quotes don't matter. I keep getting that question all the time, so that's the only reason I bring that up. Alright, so let's create the next one. It's going to be exactly the same, except, you know, obviously it's going to be 8. So let's just change this to 8. And I like to keep things on separate lines with spaces in between them. I know some people were irritated by that, sorry. And this is going to be on row 1. However, this is going to be in the second column or column 1. And then create another one, and let's have this be 9 and this be 9. Once again, everything else here is going to be the same. Change this to 9, and this is going to be column 2. And then we're going to have to do the same sort of thing for our division button, but this is going to be a math function, so it's going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to call this self button, and I'll call it div. And the text inside of here is going to be like this, and lambda. And what am I going to call instead of button press, this is going to be the math button press. Why don't we just call it math button press? That works. And what's going to be passed inside of it? Well, we'll just pass in the division right there. And row 1 is going to be fine, and the column needs to be changed to 3. And that looks like that's getting somewhere. So what I want to do is I actually want to test this, and I want to see how it looks. Now that I created my first row, I'm going to go and I'm going to test it. So outside of my class, I am then going to first get our root window object. So root is equal to tk. And then what else are we going to do? We're going to create our calculator object. And we do that by going calculator, and we pass root inside of it, and also we do root and main loop because that's going to keep our application running. Alright, so let's go and run it and see what happens. And we run it, and you can see that it looks kind of okay. There are some spacing issues, it's not wide enough and so forth, but everything else looks perfectly fine. If I click on this, it's going to cause errors because functions that I tied to it do not exist. So let's come up here and let's look at what we need to change. The root geometry, let's take this up to 430, and that's 400, and let's run it and come down here and open it up, and that looks a little better. Alright, so we have roughly the same amount of space here as we do on the right side, and everything else looks pretty okay. Alright, so we're going to stick with that. We have no idea what the height needs to be because we need to add in all of these other different things. And I also would like to keep these separated. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say something like first row so that we know that that is our first row of buttons. And then we're going to have our second row of buttons. I obviously would normally put in more comments than this, but for now this is what we got. And now we have our second row. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and basically copy and paste this stuff and just throw in this extra stuff underneath here so that you don't have to waste your time watching it. All I'm going to be doing is changing these to 4, 5, 6, and 7 and putting multiplication and all that stuff. So I'm going to pause the video, make all those edits, and then come back and you'll see all the changes. Okay, so here I am back, and the only thing that is different here is right here we have our equals button, and I put in a function called equal button press. Everything else is exactly as you would think. We just increased the rows as we created additional rows, and I also left homework inside of here. You're going to have to come in here and figure out how to make the clear button work. It's homework, it's very simple, you should be able to do it no problem. Just wanted to give you some homework because you people ask me for homework all the time. I have no idea why. Alright, so there's homework for you. Alright, so we have all of the different buttons created, and let's run it and see what happens. Once again, of course, that code is in the description. Alright, so we have this. Obviously, the height is completely wrong, so let's come in here and let's change the height and see how we can make it a little bit better. Let's change it to 200 just to see what happens. Control R and we'll open it, and it's too small. So let's go and do something like 220 and Control R, and let's see it. and it's not perfect, but it looks about right. All right, so there is the finished interface for our calculator, and I think it looks pretty good. We could obviously move the pixels around or whatever, but you can do that. All right, so now what do we need to do? Well, we need to refer to our use case description, and we need to go in and create the functions we need. So the very first function I want to create is my button press function, and that is going to be called anytime a number button is going to be pressed. So let's create that, and let's do a button press. And what I normally do here is I just go and write all the code because I went and did the use case description, and everything should be perfectly fine. So can't get out of that habit. All right, so let's go here. Well, the very first thing I want to do, based off of referring to the use case, is I want to get the current value in our entry. So whenever they press a button, these are number buttons, not math buttons or equals buttons. These are numbers buttons, and value is going to pass in that number. So what I want to do is get the current value in the entry. To do that, I go entry, and value is equal to self and number entry, and call the get function, and that'll get that for me, and it will store it in entry value. All right, so we have that. And the next thing I want to do is if they hit multiple number buttons, I want to put the new value they hit to the right of the old number that was inside of there. So we're going to say entry and value plus equal to and value that they passed inside of it. Then I want to clear my entry box. So I'm going to say self and number entry and delete 0 and end. I covered this in a previous tutorial. That's how you delete an entry, right like that. And then I want to insert the new value into that box. So I'm going to say self number entry and insert, and then 0 and entry value. All right. So when I hit the number buttons, it is going to go and get the current value that is inside of there if it does exist, and it's going to continue adding as the additional number buttons are pressed. And that's all I need to do because that is all my use case says I need to do. All right, so let's see if my use case works out and if it's a good use case. Next thing I want to do is I need to handle the logic when math buttons are going to be pressed, and I already know that this is going to be called math button press, because that's what I called it when I was creating my interface. And the value in this situation is going to be one of the math buttons. And whenever I code and talk, I type self twice. All right, so we got that done. And now by referring to my use case, I know that I only want to go in here and do something if a value is already in the entry. And remember, I also, looking at my use case, know that I want to work with floats. So that brings something to mind. I need to create another function that is going to check if the values in the entry boxes are floats. So I am going to create a custom function called isFloat because this is not built into Python. And this is going to receive a string value, and it is going to return true or false if that string value is a float. So we're going to say try, and then I'm going to say if the string isn't a float, that whenever I go and try to convert it into a float, we're going to throw a value arrow. So I'm going to say float and throw the string value inside of there. And then I know if an error wasn't triggered there, that I can return true. Otherwise, I know that I am going to want to catch that value error. And in that situation, I want to return false because I know that it is not a float. Okay, so value error. All right, so now I have a way to convert things into, or find out if a number is a float or not. So back to our math button press function. So I only want to do something if the entry has a value or not. So here I'm going to say isFloat. Self is float. I'm referring to a method inside of here, and I should make that static, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. I just want to get this program running. So I'm going to convert what is inside of there into a string, and I'm going to say self number entry and then call get on that guy. And I think I got all that right. So if we do have a float value inside of here, well, the very first thing I want to do is make all of my previous triggers, these guys up here, I want to turn all those back into false. because I know that my current math is going to be here. And this is just based off of going off of my use case. Might not be perfect, but we're aiming to just follow the use case. That is the only reason why we are doing this. All right, so self, and there we go. So we set all those back to false because we have the last value that was clicked on here. All right, so now what else can we do? Well, we want to get the value out of the entry box for our calculation. So I'm going to say self calculate value and equal to, and remember we're going to always convert everything into floats, so we're going to say self and entry value, and we'll call get once again. And now what I want to do is, depending upon the value they passed inside of here, I want to set these triggers, if they match, to true. So we're going to come in here and we'll say something like if value passed in is equal to the division. I want to put some information out here in my output window as well, just to make sure that things look like they're working right. Every once in a while I get an inkling that maybe I should do that. So I'm going to do this. This is just for debugging purposes. So I'm going to say that that was pressed, and then I'm going to go self and the division trigger and set that to true. Then I'm going to do that for everything else. So let's just come in here, let's copy that, come down here, and then we'll change this into elif. Value is equal to, and we'll do multiplication this time, and we'll say multiplication was pressed, and this is going to be mult trigger. Set that to true. Let's set it to true like that and like that. And then let's do the next one. So like this, and elif is equal to, and this time we will check for an addition, and we're going to add addition here, and we'll say add trigger, and we'll set this to true. And then otherwise paste, we're going to just come in here and just do else. We'll just be lazy with this and say else, and we'll say subtraction is going to be used by default, and sub trigger. The only way this function is going to get called is if one of the math functions was clicked on, so we should be okay here. And we'll say that that is true as well. Then what do we need to do? Well, refer to our use case description. Well, I have written here that I want to clear the entry box every single time we come in here, after we get the value inside of it, of course. So I'm going to go number entry, and I will call a delete, and we'll delete what is inside of the entry box currently. And that's it. That, based off of what's in the use case description, is all that I need to do for my math button press function. So that leaves us with our equal button press function. So this is going to perform a mathematical operation by taking the value before the math button is clicked and the current value, and then it's going to perform the right calculation by checking what math button was clicked last. Okay, so that's it. So we're going to go define and equal button press, and nothing's getting passed in here because we know every single time we work with this, it is going to be the equals button. There's no other way to get inside of this function. And now what we need to do is make sure a math button was clicked, otherwise we don't want to do anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if self add trigger or self sub trigger, or if any of these are true, self multiplication trigger or self division trigger. If any of those are true, well then we're allowed to do some stuff inside of our function based off of what I think. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if self add trigger, well then I want to perform a different type of calculation. So I'm going to create a guy called solution, and I'm going to go self dot calculate value. And remember, we always want to work with floats, so we're going to say float and get the current value inside of our entry window, and we'll say get like that, and that will be our solution. And then I'm going to do the same thing over and over again for all of the different math functions. So let's just come in here and we'll say elif, and this time we will do the subtraction. So we'll do subtraction, and here I'm just going to go subtraction like that, and that's all we need to do. And let's go like this, and elif, and right about now I'm starting to think, oh boy, I hope this compiles and runs properly. Now I'm going to do the multiplication, and we will multiply this guy right here, And then otherwise, we're just going to be lazy for now, and we'll say else, and we will go and do the division for this guy. So we'll say else. By default, we're going to do a division. Alright, so now to be safe, I want to print some information like I did previously with this guy up here, see, so that I can track what button was pressed. I want to just print all the information out on the screen. Obviously, I'm going to delete this as soon as the application looks like it's going to work. So I'm just going to go print, and I'm going to go self, and I want to print out the calculation value inside of here, and a space, and I'm going to get the self entry value, and we'll get that guy like this. And then after we get that, I'd also like to print out on the screen, well, I'm going to put another space, and I want to print out my solution so we can track that. So this is just me preparing for potential debugging issues. And by referring to my use case, I see that I also want to clear the entry box and put the solution inside of it, obviously. So we'll say number entry, and I'm going to delete what is in there currently if there is anything inside of there, and then after that put the solution inside of there. So we'll say solution number entry, and we will do an insert and 0 and solution. Alright, so based off of every single thing I have in the use case description, I have covered everything. So now it's time to check if our code is going to work for us. So let's run it. Control R, and let's hope and pray that it works. Alright, so here's the calculator, and let's see if it's going to work for us. So we're going to just go and click on 7, and we're going to click on plus, and we're going to click on 7, and it goes equal. Hey, look at that, and it's a float. Now let's divide it by 2 and see what happens. 7. Beautiful. Now let's multiply it times 4 equal to 28. Looks like that works as well. Minus 8 equal to 20 plus 6 equal to 26 divided by 9 equal to 2 point. Look at that. Maybe we might decide we want to, shrink that down. Plus 1 equal to, and it looks like it works, guys. Divided by 6 equal to, and it looks like it works. So that is absolutely awesome. Of course, I might have missed something. Your job, and here we have all these guys, which maybe or maybe we don't need them. Doesn't matter. But what I leave for you to do for homework is to go in here and test to see if you can break it. Divided by 6 is equal to, I don't know, divided by 100. I'm trying to break it, and it looks like it works. Plus 1 is equal to, looks like it works. All right. So go in there, test it, play around with it, maybe add some additional mathematical functions to it, make it your own calculator. And for homework, of course, your job is to make the clear button work. So if you guys enjoyed it, I enjoyed making this tutorial. It was a blast. And like always, please leave your questions and comments below. Otherwise, till next time.